The Dhammapada, Chapter 8. Sahassa Vagga, thousands. Verse 100. One useful sentence is better than 1,000 useless words. Sahassang api che vacha anatha padasanghita ekangatha padang seyo yang sutva upasammati. Better than 1,000 utterances comprising useless words is one single beneficial utterance, by hearing which one is calmed. An executioner and his fate. Dhammapada. Dhammapada, who was a former thief, had served the king as the public executioner for 55 years, and had just retired from that post. One day, he went to the river for a bath, intending to take some specially prepared food on his return home. As he was about to take the food, Venerable Sariputta, who had just arisen from sustained absorption in concentration, jhana samapatti, stood at his door for alms food. Seeing the monk, Dhammapada thought to himself, "Throughout my life I have been executing thieves. Now I should offer this food to the monk." So he invited Venerable Sariputta to come in, and respectfully offered the food. After the meal, Venerable Sariputta taught him the Dhamma, but Dhammapada could not pay attention, because he was extremely disturbed as he recollected his past career as an executioner. This mental disturbance did not allow him to concentrate properly. Venerable Sariputta knew this, and in order to put him in a proper frame of mind, he asked Dhammapada tactfully whether he killed the thieves because he wished to kill them out of anger or hate, or simply because he was ordered to do so. Dhammapada answered that he was ordered to kill them by the king, and that he had no ill will or wish to kill. "If that is the case," Venerable Sariputta asked, "what wrong did you do?" Thus reassured, his mind became calmer, and he requested Venerable Sariputta to continue his sermon. As he listened to the Dhamma attentively, his mind became tranquil, and he developed the virtues of patience and understanding. After the discourse, Dhammapada accompanied Venerable Sariputta for some distance, and then returned home. On his way home, he died due to an accident. When the Buddha came to the congregation of the Bhikkhus in the evening, they informed him about the death of Dhammapada. When asked where Dhammapada was reborn, the Buddha told them that although Dhammapada had committed evil deeds throughout his life, because he comprehended the Dhamma, he was reborn in the Tushita Deva world. The bhikkhus wondered how such an evildoer could have such great benefit after listening to the Dhamma just once. To them, the Buddha said that the length of a discourse is of no consequence, for one single sentence of the Dhamma, correctly understood, can produce much benefit. Verse 101. One useful verse is better than 1,000 useless verses. Sahassang api che gatha anatha padasanghita ekangatha padang seyo yang sutva upasammati. Better than 1,000 verses comprising useless words is one beneficial single verse, by hearing which one is calmed. The fastest way to attain arahanthood, Bahya. A group of merchants went out to sea in a boat. Their boat was wrecked at sea, and all except one died. The only survivor got hold of a plank and eventually came to land at the port of Suparaka. As he was naked, he tied a piece of bark to his body and sat in a place where people could see him. Passers-by gave him food. Some thought that he was a holy man and paid respects to him. Some brought clothes for him to wear, but he refused, fearing that by wearing clothes, people would give him less respect. Besides, because some said that he was an arahant, he mistakenly came to think that he really was one. Thus, because he was a man of wrong views, who was wearing a piece of bark as his clothing, he came to be known as Bahya Daruchirya. At about this time, Mahabrahma, who had been his friend in one of his previous existences, saw him going astray and felt that it was his duty to put Bahya on the right path. So, Mahabrahma came to him in the night and said to him, Bahya, you are not an arahant yet, and what is more, you do not have the qualities that make one an arahant. Faced with the truth, Bahya looked up at Mahabrahma and said, Yes, I must admit that I am not an arahant, as you have said. I now realize that I have done a great mistake. But is there anyone in this world now who is an arahant? Mahabrahma then advised him to go and seek help from the Buddha, who was staying in Savatthi. Bahya, realizing the enormity of his guilt, felt very much distressed and traveled all the way to Savatthi to see the Buddha. Bahya found the Buddha going on an alms round with other bhikkhus and respectfully followed him. He pleaded with the Buddha to teach him the Dhamma, but the Buddha replied that since they were on an alms round, it was not yet time for a religious discourse. And again Bahya pleaded, Venerable Sir, one cannot know the danger to your life or to my life, so please teach me the Dhamma. The Buddha knew that Bahya's mental faculties were not yet ready to completely realize the Dhamma. The Buddha also knew that Bahya's mind was not receptive at that time, because he had just made the long journey, and also because he was overwhelmed with joy at seeing him. The enlightened one did not want to expound the Dhamma immediately, but wanted him to calm down, to enable him to absorb the Dhamma properly. Still, Bahya persistently pleaded. So, while standing on the road, the Buddha said to him, Bahya, when you see an object, be conscious of just the visible object. When you hear a sound, be conscious of just the sound. When you smell or taste or touch something, be conscious of just the smell, the taste, or the touch. And when you think of anything, be conscious of just that mind object. Bahya did as he was told, and because of his deep concentration, the accumulated kammic force of his past good deeds became dominant, and he attained arahanthood. He asked permission from the Buddha to join the order. The Buddha told him to first collect the robes, the bowl, and other requisites of a bhikkhu. On his way to get them, he was attacked by an animal and died. When the Buddha and the other bhikkhus came out after having had their meal, They found Bahya lying dead on the road. As instructed by the Buddha, the bhikkhus cremated the body of Bahya, and his ashes were enshrined in a stupa. Back at the Jetavana monastery, the Buddha told the bhikkhus that Bahya had attained Nibbana. He also told them that as far as the time factor was concerned in attaining insight, or abhinya, Bahya was the fastest, the best. The bhikkhus were puzzled by the statement made by the Buddha, and they asked him how and when Bahya had become an arahant. To this, the Buddha replied, Bahya attained arahanthood while he was listening to my instructions given to him on the road when we were on the alms round. The bhikkhus wondered how one could attain arahanthood after listening to just a few words of the Dhamma. So, the Buddha told them that the number of words or the length of a speech does not matter if it was beneficial to someone. Verse 102. Better than 100 useless words is one word of the Dhamma. Yocha gatha satang bhase anatha padasanghita ekang gatha padang seyo yang sutva pasammati. Should one recite 100 verses comprising useless words, better is one single word of the Dhamma, by hearing which one is pacified. Verse 103. Self-conquest is the best of all conquests. Yo sahassang sahassena sangame manuse jine ekancha jaya mattanang save sangamanjutamo. Though one should conquer 1,000,000 men in the battlefield, yet he indeed is the noblest victor who has conquered himself. The rich girl who married a thief, Kundalakesi. Kundalakesi was the daughter of a rich man from Vagga. She had led a very secluded life, but one day she happened to see a thief who was about to be executed for his crimes. She immediately fell in love with him. She refused to eat and preferred to die unless she could have him. Her parents had to bribe the king's officer to secure his freedom, and they married her off to him. Although she loved her husband very much, her husband, being a thief, was only attracted to her wealth. One day, he persuaded her to put on all her jewelry and led her to the top of the mountain, saying that he wanted to make some offerings to the guardian spirit of the mountain for saving his life when he was in danger. Kundalakesi went along with her husband, but when they reached their destination, the thief revealed that he wanted to kill her and take her jewels. She pleaded with him to take her jewels, but to spare her life, but it was of no avail. She then realized that if she did not get rid of her husband, there would be no way of escape for her. She felt she must be cautious and crafty. So she told her husband that as they would be together only for a few moments more, she wanted to pay respects to him for the last time. So saying, while going round the man, she pushed him off the mountain from behind. The Deva dwelling at the top of the mountain, who had witnessed the whole episode, applauded the woman and commented, "Wisdom is not always confined to men. A woman too is wise, and shows it now and then." After this, she had no desire to return home. She left all her jewelry hanging on a tree, and went on her way without any idea where she was going. She happened to come to a place where paribhajikas, female wandering ascetics, lived, and she herself became a paribhajika. They taught her all their skills in sophistry and being intelligent. She mastered all of them within a short time. Then her teachers told her to go out, and should she find somebody who could answer all her questions, she should become his pupil. Kundalakesi went throughout the length and breadth of the country, openly challenging everyone else to compete with her. She met many famous men, but none could answer all her questions. Finally, she came to Savatthi. Before entering the city for alms food, she made a mound of sand and stuck a branch of a tree on it, her usual sign of an invitation to all others to take up her challenge. Venerable Sariputta took up her challenge. She asked him innumerable questions, and Sariputta answered them all. When his turn came to question, he asked her just this: "What is the meaning of one?" She could not answer. So she asked Venerable Sariputta to teach her the answer to the question. Venerable Sariputta replied that she should first become a bhikkhuni. So she became a bhikkhuni. She practiced diligently what Venerable Sariputta taught her, and within a few days she attained arahanthood. Soon after this, the bhikkhus asked the Buddha, could it be possible for Bhikkhuni Kundalakesi to become an arahant after listening to the Dhamma only a little? The Buddha replied, Bhikkhus, don't judge the Dhamma as little or much. One sentence of the Dhamma is better than 100 sentences that are meaningless. A note from the author. There is only one thing in this world which living beings need to survive. That is food. Verses 104 and 105. Be rather a victor of yourself than a victor of others. None can turn self-victory into defeat. Atta have jitang seyo, ya chayang itara paja, atta dantassa posassa, nichang sanyatacharino, neva devo na gandhabbo, namaro saha brahmuna, jitang apajitang kaira, tatharupassa jantuno. Self-conquest is indeed far greater than the conquest of all other folk. Neither a god, nor a Gandhabba, nor Mara, nor Brahma can win back the victory of such a person who is self-subdued and ever lives in restraint. Gain and loss in gambling. On one occasion, a Brahmin told the Buddha, Venerable Sir, I think you know only the practices that are beneficial and not the practices that are unbeneficial. The Buddha replied that he also knew the practices which were unbeneficial and harmful. Then the Buddha enumerated 6 practices which cause dissipation of wealth. They are 1. Sleeping until the sun has arisen. 2. Habitual idleness. 3. Cruelty. 4. Indulgence in intoxicants which cause drunkenness and negligence. 5. Wandering alone in streets at suspicious hours. And 6. Sexual misconduct. Further, the Buddha asked the Brahmin how he earned his living, and the Brahmin replied that he earned his living by playing dice, in other words, by gambling. Next, the Buddha asked him whether he had won or lost. When the Brahmin answered that he sometimes lost and sometimes won, the Buddha said to him, "To win in a game of dice is nothing compared to a victory over moral defilements." A note from the author. In the Parabhava Sutta, the Buddha says that gambling is one of the causes of man's downfall. Verse 106. A moment's honor to the worthy is better than long-continued honor to the unworthy. Mase sahassena yo yajitha satam samang ekancha bhavitattanang muhuttam api pujaye sayeva pujana seyo yanche vassa satang hutang. Though month after month, with 1,000 sacrifices, one should make an offering for 100 years, yet, if only for a moment, one should honor a saint who has perfected himself, that honor is indeed better than a century of sacrifice. The way to the Brahma world. On one occasion, Venerable Sariputta asked his uncle, a Brahmin, whether he was doing any meritorious deeds. The Brahmin answered that he was making offerings every month to the naked ascetics, hoping to get to the Brahma world in his next existence. Sariputta then explained to him that his teachers did not know the way to the Brahma world. So saying, he took his uncle to the Buddha and requested the Buddha to expound the Dhamma, which would surely take one to the Brahma world. The Buddha said to the Brahmin, "An offering of a spoonful of alms food to a genuinely holy man would be much better than your offerings to others who are not worthy of honor." Verse 107. A moment's honor to the pure is better than a century of fire sacrifice. Yoche vassa satam jantu aggim parichare vane ekancha bhavitattanam muhuttam api pujaye sayeva pujana seyo yanche vassa satang hutang. Though for a century a man should tend the sacred fire in the forest, yet if only for a moment he should honor a saint who has perfected himself, that honor is, indeed, better than a century of fire sacrifice. Fire worshipping is not the way. On another occasion, Venerable Sariputta asked his nephew, a Brahmin, whether he was doing any meritorious deeds. His nephew answered that he had been sacrificing a goat in fire worship every month, hoping to get to the Brahma world in his next existence. Sariputta then explained to him that his teachers had given him false hopes, and that they themselves did not know the way to the Brahma world. Then he took his nephew, the young Brahmin, to the Buddha. There, the Buddha taught him the Dhamma that would lead one to the Brahma world, and said to the Brahmin, "Paying homage to the holy man for a moment would be far better than making sacrifices in fire worship for 100 years." A note from the author. Fire worshipping was a common practice in Iran and India at that time. Some people regarded the fire element as one of their gods. Some others believed that through fire worshipping they can please the gods in order to receive their blessings and protection. The other common practices were animal sacrifice and taking bath in holy waters. The Buddha was the only religious teacher at that time, who pointed out the futility of such practices. Verse 108. Better than sacrificial slaughter of animals is honor to the pure ones. Yankinchi itham va hutang va loke samvatcharang yajetha punyape ko sabbang pi tang chatubhagameti abhivadana ujjugate suseyo. In this world, whatever gift or alms a person seeking merit should offer for a year, all that is not worth a single quarter of the reverence towards the upright, which is excellent. The Brahmin who sacrificed animals. Once Venerable Sariputta asked his friend, a Brahmin, whether he was doing any meritorious deeds, and he replied that he had been making sacrificial offerings on a big scale, hoping to get to the Brahma world in his next existence. Sariputta told him that his teachers had given him false hopes, and that they themselves did not know the way to the Brahma world. Then he took his friend to the Buddha, who showed him the way to the Brahma world. To the friend of Sariputta, the Buddha said, Brahmin, paying respect to the noble ones, the Aryas, even for a moment, is better than making sacrificial offerings, great or small, throughout the year. Verse 109. Blessed indeed are they who honor those worthy of honor. Abhivadana silissa nichang vadha pachayino chattaro dhamma vadhanti ayuvanno sukhang balang. For one who is in the habit of constantly honoring and respecting the elders, 4 blessings increase: age, beauty, bliss, and strength. How the Buddha protected a child. Ayu Vadhana. Once there were 2 hermits who lived together practicing religious austerities for many years. Later, one of them left the hermit life and got married. After a son was born, the family visited the old hermit and paid their respects to him. To the parents, the hermit said, "May you live long," but he said nothing to the child. The parents were puzzled and asked the hermit the reason for his silence. The hermit told them that the child would live only 7 more days, and that while he himself did not know how to prevent his death, Gautama, the Buddha, might know how to do it. So the parents took the child to the Buddha. When they paid homage to the Buddha, he also said, "May you live long," to the parents only, and not to the child. The Buddha also knew of the impending death of the child. To prevent his death, the parents were told to build a pavilion at the entrance to the house, and put the child on a couch in the pavilion. Then some bhikkhus were sent there to chant the parittas for 7 days. On the 7th day, the Buddha himself came to that pavilion. The devas were also in attendance. At that time, an evil spirit was at the entrance, waiting for the chance to attack the child. But as more powerful devas arrived, the demon had to step back and make room for them, so that he had to stay at a place very far away from the child. That whole night, the recitation of the parittas continues, thus protecting the child. The next day, the child was taken up from the couch and made to pay respects to the Buddha. This time the Buddha said, "May you live long," to the child. When asked how long the child would live, the Buddha replied that he would live up to 120 years. So the child was named Ayu Vaddhana. When the child grew up, he went about the country with his friends and fellow devotees. One day they came to the Jetavana monastery, and the bhikkhus, recognizing him, asked the Buddha, "For living beings, is there any means of gaining longevity?" To this question the Buddha answered, "By respecting and honoring the elders, and those who are wise and virtuous, one would gain not only longevity, but also beauty, happiness, and strength." A note from the author. Parittas are religious stanzas or suttas, like the Metta Sutta and the Ratana Sutta, that are usually recited for protection against harmful influences. Verse 110. A short but virtuous life is better than a long but immoral life. Yocha vassa satang jive dussilo asamahito ekahang jivitang seyo silavantassa jhayino. Though one should live 100 years, immoral and uncontrolled, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who is moral and meditative. The miracle of a young novice monk, Sankicca. One day, 30 bhikkhus each took a subject of meditation from the Buddha and left for a large village, a long distance away from Savatthi. At that time, a group of robbers were staying in a thick jungle, and they wanted to make an offering of human flesh and blood to the guardian spirits of the forest. So they came to the village monastery and demanded that one of the bhikkhus be given up to them for sacrifice to the spirits. From the eldest to the youngest, each one of the bhikkhus volunteered to go. Among the bhikkhus was a young samanera or novice monk by the name of Sankicca, who was sent with them by Venerable Sariputta. Although he was very young, as a result of great perseverance in his past lives, had already attained arahanthood. Sankicca revealed that Sariputta, his teacher, knowing of this danger in advance, had purposely sent him to accompany the bhikkhus, and that he should be the one to go with the robbers. The bhikkhus were very reluctant, but because they had confidence in the wisdom of Venerable Sariputta, they agreed to let him go. When the preparations for the sacrifice were completed, the leader of the robbers lifted his sword and struck hard at the young samanera, who was then in deep jhana concentration. Instead of cutting the flesh, the sword curled up. He got another sword and struck again. This time it bent upwards right up to the hilt without harming Sankicca. Seeing this strange happening, the leader of the robbers dropped his sword, knelt at the feet of the samanera, and asked his pardon. All the other robbers were amazed and terror-stricken. They also admitted their mistake and asked permission from Sankicca to follow his religious way of life. He complied with their request. Sankicca then returned to the village monastery, accompanied by the new bhikkhus. The other bhikkhus felt very much relieved and happy on seeing him. Then Sankicca and the bhikkhus went to pay respects to Venerable Sariputta, their teacher, at the Jetavana monastery. After seeing Venerable Sariputta, they went to pay homage to the Buddha. The Buddha admonished them, "Bhikkhus, If you rob or steal and commit all sorts of evil deeds, your lives would be meaningless, even if you were to live 100 years. Living a virtuous life, even for a single day, is much better than 100 years of a life of depravity. Verse 111. A brief life of wisdom is better than a long life of foolishness. Yocha vassa satang jive duppanyo asamahito ekahang jivitang seyo panyavantassa jhayino. Though one should live 100 years without wisdom and control, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who is wise and meditative. Venerable Candana and the robbers. Venerable Candana, after taking a subject of meditation from the Buddha, went into the jungle to practice meditation, and there attained sainthood. Returning to pay homage to the Buddha, he stopped on the way to rest for a while. He sat on a stone slab, his mind fixed in jhana concentration. At that moment, a group of robbers, after looting a village, came to the place where the monk was. Taking him for a tree stump, they put their bundles of loot all over and around the body of the monk. At daybreak, they realized that what they took to be a tree stump was, in fact, a living being. Then again, they thought it was an evil spirit and tried to run away in fright. The monk revealed to them that he was only a bhikkhu and not a spirit, and told them not to get frightened. The robbers were awed by his words and asked his pardon for mistaking him to be a tree stump. Soon afterwards, the robbers also decided to follow his religious way of life. The monk, accompanied by the new bhikkhus, reported the matter to the Buddha, who admonished them. To live for 100 years in ignorance, doing foolish things, is meaningless. Now that you have seen the truth and have become wise, your lives of one day as wise men are much more worthwhile. The new bhikkhus practiced what they were taught and strove diligently to work for their spiritual development. Verse 112. A brief life of effort is better than a long life of inaction. Yocha vassasatang jive kusito hinaviryo ekahang jivitang seyo viriyang arabhato dalhang. Though one should live 100 years idle and inactive, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who makes an intense effort. Attaining sainthood while attempting suicide. Sappadasa. Once a bhikkhu by the name of Sappadasa was not feeling happy with his religious way of life, since he could not gain sainthood or arhatship, and at the same time he thought it would be improper and humiliating for him to return to the life of a householder. So he decided it would be better to die. He put his hand into a pot where there was a poisonous snake, but the snake did not bite him. This was because the good deeds he had done in his past lives protected him. On another occasion, he took a razor to cut his throat. But as he placed the razor on his throat, he reflected on the purity of his moral practices throughout his life as a bhikkhu, and his whole body was suffused with delightful satisfaction of joy and bliss, piti and sukha. Then, detaching himself from bliss, he directed his mind to the development of insight knowledge, and soon attained arahanthood. On arrival at the monastery, other bhikkhus asked him where he had been. He told them he had tried to take his own life, and they asked him why he had not done so. He answered, "I intended to cut my throat with this knife, but I have now cut off all moral defilements with the knife of insight knowledge." The bhikkhus then reported to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, Sappadasa claims that he has attained arahanthood while trying to kill himself. Is it possible to attain arahanthood at such a critical moment?" The Buddha replied, "Yes, it is possible. For one who is zealous and strenuous in the practice of tranquility and insight development, arahanthood can be gained in an instant. As the bhikkhu walks in meditation, he can attain arahanthood even before his raised foot touches the ground." A note from the author. The attainment of arahanthood is pure mental achievement which has no relevance to time and space in a mundane sense. Verse 113. A brief life of reflection is better than a long life of non-reflection. Yocha vassasatang jive apasang udayavyayang ekahang jivitang seyo passato udayavyayang. Though one should live 100 years without comprehending how all things rise and pass away, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who comprehends how all things rise and pass away. Patachara is bereft of all her family. Patachara was the daughter of a rich man from Savatthi. She was very beautiful and was well guarded by her parents. But one day she fell in love and eloped with a young attendant of the family and went to live in a village far away from Savatthi. In due course she became pregnant. As the time for confinement drew near, on several occasions she asked permission from her husband to return to her parents in Savatthi, but her husband, fearing that he would be beaten up by her parents, discouraged her. So, one day, while her husband was away, she set out for the home of her parents. Her husband managed to catch up with her on the way and pleaded with her to return home, but she refused. Since the delivering time was due, she gave birth to a son near a bush. After the birth of her son, she returned home with her husband. Then she became pregnant again, and she made the same request as before and received the same answer. As the time for the second confinement drew near, she again set out for the home of her parents in Savatthi, taking her son with her. Her husband followed her and caught up with her on the way, but her time for delivery was coming on very fast, and it was also raining heavily. The husband went to look for a suitable place, and while he was clearing a little patch of land, he was bitten by a poisonous snake and died on the spot. Patachara, while waiting for his return, gave birth to her second son. In the morning she searched for her husband, but only found his dead body. Full of grief and blaming herself for the death of her husband, she continued on her way to her parents. Because it had rained incessantly the whole night, the river was swollen, so it was not possible for her to cross the river carrying both her sons. Leaving the elder boy on one bank of the river, she crossed the stream with her day-old son, and left him on the other bank. She then went back for the elder boy. While she was in the middle of the river, a hawk hovered over the baby, thinking it was a piece of meat. She shouted to frighten away the hawk, but it was all in vain. The hawk carried the baby away. Meanwhile, the elder boy heard his mother shouting from the middle of the river, and thought she was calling for him. He tried to go to his mother, but was carried away by the strong current. Thus, Patachara lost her 2 sons as well as her husband. So she wept and lamented loudly. A son is carried away by a hawk, another son is carried away by the current. My husband is also dead, bitten by a poisonous snake. Then she met a man from Savatthi and tearfully asked after her parents. The man replied that due to a violent storm in Savatthi the previous night, the house of her parents had fallen down, and that both her parents, together with her only brother, had died and had been cremated. On hearing this tragic news, Patachara went stark mad. She did not even notice that her clothes had fallen off from her and that she was half naked. She went about the streets shouting out, "Woe is me!" At this time the Buddha was preaching at the Jetavana monastery, and he saw Patachara at a distance. So he willed that she should come to the congregation. The crowd, seeing her coming, tried to stop her, saying, "Don't let the mad woman come in." But the Buddha told them not to prevent her coming in. When Patachara was close enough to hear him, he told her to control her mind and to keep calm. As she became aware of herself, she realized that she did not have her skirt on and quietly sat down. Someone gave her a piece of cloth to cover herself. She then told the Buddha how she had lost her sons, her husband, her parents, and her only brother. The Buddha consoled her. "Patachara, have no fear. You have now come to one who can protect you and can really guide you. Throughout this round of existences, of samsara, the amount of tears you have shed on account of the death of sons, husbands, parents, and brothers is voluminous." Then the Buddha expounded to her the Anamatagga Sutta, which dealt with countless existences, and she felt relieved and calmed. The Buddha added that one should not worry too much about those who were gone, but that one should purify oneself and strive to realize Nibbana. On hearing this discourse, Patachara realized the uncertainty and futility of existence and became established in the path that leads to the attainment of liberation from samsara. Patachara became a bhikkhuni. One day, she was cleaning her feet with water from a water pot. As she poured the water for the first time, it flowed only a short distance and disappeared. Then she poured for the second time, and the water went a little further. But the water she poured for the third time went the farthest. As she looked at the flow and the disappearance of water poured out successively for 3 times, she came to perceive clearly the 3 stages in the life of beings. The Buddha, seeing her through his supernormal powers from the Jetavana monastery, sent forth his radiance and exhorted her, "Patachara, you are now on the right path, and you now have the true perception of the component things, khandhas, of life. One who does not perceive the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality of the component things is useless even if he were to live for 100 years. Soon after, Patachara attained arahanthood." Verse 114. One day of experiencing the deathless is better than a century without such an experience. Yocha vassa satang jive apasang amatang padang ekahang jivitang seyo passato amatang padang. Though one should live 100 years without perceiving the deathless state, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who perceives the deathless state. The cure for death, Kisa Gotami. Kisa Gotami lived in Savatthi. She was known as Kisa Gotami because of her slim body. Kisa Gotami married a rich young man, and a son was born to them. The son died when he was just a toddler, and Kisa Gotami was stricken with grief. Carrying her dead son, she went everywhere asking for medicine that would restore her son to life. People thought she had gone mad, but a wise man, seeing her pathetic condition, decided to send her to the Buddha. He advised her, "Sister, the Buddha is the person you should approach. He has the medicine you want. Go to him." Thus, she went to the Buddha and asked him to give her the medicine that would restore her dead son to life. The Buddha, knowing her distracted mental condition, told her to get some mustard seeds from a home where there had been no death. Overjoyed at the prospect of having her son be restored to life, Kisa Gotami ran from house to house, begging for some mustard seeds. Everyone was willing to help her, but she could not find a single home where death had not occurred. The people were only too willing to part with their mustard seeds, but they could not claim to have not lost a dear one in death. As the day dragged on, she realized that hers was not the only family that had faced death, and that there were more people dead than living. As soon as she realized this, her attitude towards her dead son changed. She was no longer attached to the dead body of her son, and she realized how simply the Buddha had taught her a most important lesson, that everything that is born must eventually die. She buried her dead son and told the Buddha that she could find no family where death had not occurred. Then the Buddha said, "Gotami, you should not think that you are the only one who has lost a son. As you have now realized, death comes to all beings. Before their desires are satiated, death takes them away." Perceiving the fleeting nature and impermanency of life, Kisa Gotami decided to renounce the worldly life. She then requested the Enlightened One to admit her to the order of Bhikkhunis. Accordingly, the Buddha sent her to the community of nuns and directed that she be admitted. Thus, she was admitted as Bhikkhuni Kisa Gotami. She was a very hard-working Bhikkhuni and was always mindful and conscientious of her religious duties, and strove diligently for her spiritual development to purify her mind of all mental defilements. One night, she lighted some oil lamps. Having lighted the oil lamps, she went and sat down a short distance away. Then she started to look at the flames. With her mind focused on the flames, she noticed that while some flames flared up, some others flickered out. With her mind concentrating on the flames as her subject of meditation, she meditated as follows. Even as it is with these flames, so also is it with living beings in this world. Some flare up, while others flicker out. Only those who have attained Nibbana are no more seen. The Buddha, through his supernormal power, saw Kisa Gotami from the Jetavana monastery. He sent forth his radiance and exhorted her to continue meditating on the impermanent nature of all component things. The Buddha also commented, "Though one should live 100 years without perceiving the deathless state, or Nibbana, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who perceives the deathless state." At the conclusion of the discourse, Kisa Gotami attained arahanthood. Verse 115. One day of perceiving the Dhamma is better than a century without such perception. Yocha vassasatang jive apasang dhammang uttamang ekahang jivitang seyo passato dhammang uttamang. Though one should live 100 years not comprehending the truth sublime, yet better indeed is a single day's life of one who comprehends the truth sublime. The children who neglected their mother. Bahu Puttika. Once in Savatthi there lived a couple with many children. All the children had gotten married and the family was doing quite well. Then the father died, and the mother, whose name was Bahupattika, kept all the property without giving anything to the children. Her sons and daughters wanted the inheritance, so they said, "Mother, now that father is dead, what is the use of you retaining the property? Can we not support you?" They said this again and again, and their mother believed that her children would look after her. So she finally divided up the property without leaving anything for herself. After the division of the property, she first went to stay with her eldest son. But her daughter-in-law complained and said, "She has come to stay with us as if she has given us 2 shares. Then Bahuputtika went to stay with her second son, and the same things were said. Thus she went from one son to another, and from one daughter to the next. But none of them was willing to support her for a long stretch of time, and none paid her due respect. Greatly disappointed with her children, she became a bhikkhuni. Bahuputtika realized that she became a bhikkhuni only in her old age, and that she must not be negligent, but must make use of the remaining period of her life to the utmost. So, for the whole night she meditated on the Dhamma, The Buddha, through supernormal power, saw her from the Jetavana monastery, sent forth his radiance, and exhorted her. The life of one who does not practice the Dhamma is useless, even if he were to live for 100 years. Reflecting mindfully on the advice given by the Buddha, Bahuputtika attained arahanthood.